Good afternoon, everyone. It is incredible getting a chance to look back on this past summer and think about the community we built, the impact we were able to achieve, and all that we've learned. And so I'm so excited to dig in with you all today and share all of that with you all. My name is Chakia Parham. I currently live near my hometown outside of Orlando, Florida. We're having a very cold Orlando day of about 50 degrees. But I began my career in education in 2009 as a kindergarten and third grade teacher in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I taught in New Orleans for about 3 years before joining the Teach for America Memphis staff as a teacher coach. And I spent 6 years as a member of the Memphis team and was a part of launching and eventually led our local summer training program. And then in 2008, I stepped into the role as the Vice President of Regional Support and Engagement and supported our teacher development programs across the many communities that we serve. And so the combination of my experience as a staff member, launching and leading our first local summer training program, and then scaling that success across 6 years, coupled with my experience supporting teacher development programs across the country, made working this past summer as a leader of a cohort of incoming teachers during the virtual summer training program an incredible leadership and learning opportunity for me. And so now I will be taking the baton from Samantha, who you'll get to meet in a moment, in my current role as the Vice President of Institute and Program Implementation to reimagine how we bring incoming teachers into our program through our summer training. And so I will pass the proverbial mic to Samantha to share more about herself.
Hey, y'all, it's so good to be with you today, and thank you, Shakia. Like Shakia, I'm actually a native Floridian. I'm originally from Miami, and I began my career in education in 2003 as a Teach for America Corps member in the Mississippi Delta, where I taught high school Spanish in a rural town in Mississippi. I went on to teach for 5 years at the high school and the community college level before joining Teach for America staff in 2009 in the Mississippi Delta. And then in 2013, just had the opportunity of a lifetime to come home to Miami and to support the development of our teachers here across Miami-Dade County Public Schools. In 2015, a little over 5 years ago, I stepped into the position of executive director, leading our work to ensure education equity for all students across Miami. And during this time, about 5 years ago, we launched a Teach for America Summer Teacher Training Institute here in Miami that first trained all of our Teach for America Miami teachers and then trained all of our incoming Teach for America teachers across the state of Florida. And the strength of that statewide Summer Teacher Training Institute laid the foundation for the role that I played this past summer when our CEO asked me to step away from my day-to-day role as the executive director here to lead our national virtual summer training institute. And so I'm looking forward today to sharing a bit more about about that with you and to share how we have evolved our teacher training model to meet the needs of this moment and to meet the needs of our teachers and our schools. And so to do that, we're going to do a couple of things together. First, I'll be the one who takes you back to the spring and just share some of the decisions that we were confronted with and share just as candidly as possible what we eventually ended up doing this summer. Then Shakia, who was a member of our virtual summer teacher training team this summer, and who, as she shared, will be leading our 2021 summer pre-service programming, we'll give some color to this, and she'll just also share more about our outcomes, where we landed this summer, and what we're thinking for next summer. And I think most importantly, we'll be able to hear directly from some of our 2020 core members and principals who received our teachers and who hired our teachers this fall. We'll hear from them and then be able to open up the floor for questions and dialogue. And I do want to invite you, if you have questions as Shakia and I share, or things are popping up for you, please do go ahead and use the chat function, and we will either try and answer those questions in the moment, or we will look for themes that when we open up the floor, we are able to connect with you all and get the conversation going and started. And And so actually, as we begin, I'd like to move forward and just sort of set the stage for you all, because we have been living with this pandemic at this point in time for, over 6 months. And so what we feel and experience today is really different, I think, than what we felt and experienced in early and mid-March. So I want to bring us all back to the pandemic and where we were this spring, and bring us back to the moment when we were all confronted by the impact of the pandemic. And so specifically, when I think about where we were with our teacher training and our programming at Teach for America, in March of this year, we were nearly a year into planning for our annual Summer Teacher Training Institutes, which always launch early in the summer. And our Summer Teacher Training Institutes are where we train our new incoming teachers in the foundations of teaching. And this has not largely changed since our inception. So basically, our model has broadly looked and felt the same. We've had thousands of new teachers begin their onboarding into the profession in a 5-week residential teacher training institute. And to kind of give color to this and help you to bring this to light, what this looks like is that for about 5 weeks in approximately 20 rural and urban cities across the country, there are several hundred teachers who live together on a college campus, and they spend their mornings at a school teaching, and they spend their afternoons really getting the training and development and teacher coaching that they need to continue to do well at their school sites. So we've got 20 of these sites across the country that are up and running every single summer. And though we've shifted our curriculum and we've shifted our approaches, broadly, the fact that this is residential at a university and then taking place in a school during the day, that has been the heart of our model and the heart of our work for about 30 years. And then, as you all know, in mid-March, we were suddenly faced with a completely new reality. Across all of our 20 sites, our universities and their residence halls started closing down. So our contracts with residence halls no longer existed. And as we connected with the schools and districts where our teachers teach summer school, all of those schools were closing down, and there really was not a path forward necessarily for what would happen in 2 weeks, if there would be summer school, if it would be in person. And so the question around what would happen there, just required something totally different. In addition to this, I just would want to name that there was incredible joblessness rates, and the racial reckoning in our country really compounded the strain and the complexity in our system. And overall, what we faced was that our model, as we knew it, would not work. And we weren't alone in this. I want to be clear. We were faced with the very same questions that teacher training programs at colleges, universities, and programs across our country were grappling with. The big questions when I consider that moment in time were like, one, in the face of school closures, where could we conduct our teaching practicums? And what would we do? Two, given the uncertainty in the system, first, would school and district leaders have confidence in our ability to deliver strong teachers who would be ready for our students on day one? So would folks actually hire our teachers given the uncertainty? And then two, when we considered the recent college graduates who'd been accepted into our program, the question really remained, would they want to stay the course? Would they remain committed? Or would they be concerned about moving? Would they be concerned about entering this profession at this time? And these were some really tough questions that we needed to tackle before we could move forward with what we would do. And so what we started doing at the time was we first went directly to school and district leaders across every single one of the cities and districts that we place in, where you can find Teach for America teachers. And what we did was we shared our context, which they totally understood, given the complexities they were facing. And we shared the uncertainties moving forward. And we asked them whether or not, given the uncertainties and given these circumstances, they felt confident hiring our Teach for America teachers, and whether they felt confident there would be roles, that they would actually be able to hire Teach for America teachers if they had confidence in this. And the answer across the board was a resounding yes. And I specifically remember speaking to one local principal here in Miami who shared with me, that they believed more than ever that the commitment and leadership that Teach for America teachers bring to his school and the adaptability and flexibility was what they needed in this moment in time. So understanding that schools were still seeking our Teach for America teachers, we then, decided to go to our accepted or admitted applicants. And so we went out directly to this year's set of incoming teachers, and we asked them, directly, where do you stand? Are you still committed to our mission? Do you want to move to a new city? Are you worried about your family and your own health and safety? And we really sought to understand where they were at and what they would need to feel confident moving forward. And ultimately, the answer directly from our incoming teachers that were in focus groups, that were in one-on-one, that were surveyed, was resounding. More than ever, they were committed to ensuring that every child had access to an excellent education, and especially so because they were watching the impact of school closures around them. And so, now that we knew that we needed to move forward and that we really needed to do something to ensure that our teachers were trained and that students had excellent teachers in the fall, the question is, so how do we move forward with training a group of over 3,000 teachers to enter the profession? How would we do that given that the building blocks of our program, which was a university site and school sites, remained closed? And so one of the most obvious and largest pivots that we had to make in a very short amount of time was that we had to move away from 20 different residential training sites across the country, all with its own leaders, all with its own set of staff, to one national program that would be delivered virtually so that our incoming teachers could shelter in place through the start of the summer and through their summer development. And so I want to name that this was a huge pivot, but it also presented an opportunity to accelerate several aspects of our work that we'd been hoping to roll out over the next several years, including a digital first approach to training, and really the idea that we wanted to clarify for folks that onboarding and pre-service at Teach for America isn't just 5 weeks. Our pre-service is much longer. We have an induction period, we have our summer training, and then we have another period of onboarding following that, over the next 2 years of our teachers' commitment. And so, we were able to sort of accelerate that work, which was exciting in the moment. But I also just want to let you know that even though I'm speaking about this as though it was a totally tenable and normal pivot, the circumstances were unheard of and the complexity was huge. So just to paint a picture then, once we moved to a national virtual model, we had approximately 10 weeks to plan the Virtual Summer Teacher Training Institute, and we would be supporting 3,000 plus teachers, 500 plus staff in 6 time zones across 49 states. And our programming needed to ensure that we would meet the certification requirements in over 25 different states, which was a level of complexity that we just really hadn't faced before. And so at that point in time, I would just say that's a bit where I come in. Our CEO knew that something of this magnitude would require an all hands on deck approach, an entrepreneurial approach, and she asked that I step away from my day-to-day work as executive director for 3 months to plan and execute our virtual summer teacher training program with a broad section of folks across Teach for America. So here are some nuts and bolts about how we approach that. As we thought about how we would actually move forward, one of the very first things that I did as I stepped into the role of head of summer training was just to take stock of where we were in this moment in time. It was scary considering the timeline that we were on, but we had tremendous assets, including a significant amount of strong curriculum, a strong set of approaches, and excellent talent that we could access at any given time, which was tremendous and truly important. But the other thing to name was that there was, really some tremendous challenges that we had to confront. And that included a very short time frame. So although I had 3 months, I only had 11 weeks to plan, and then we needed to begin to execute. And that was tremendously difficult because we did not actually have the technology or a learning management system in place. We also needed to completely reimagine our efforts, given that we would not just be, local in one time zone and all together, but instead really national and diffuse. We would also not have the opportunity to engage students in schools and school buildings. So the question, became how do our teachers build relationships and begin to engage with students? And then we also had curriculum that was strong, but was not designed to be delivered virtually. So these are some of the things that we were weighing. And in order to tackle all of that in short order, what we decided to do was, instead of taking a linear approach to our planning, which is typically what we do, it takes a full year to assess where we are, plan for the next year. We had 11 weeks. We decided to take a page out of the playbook of basically startups in the tech world by planning our summer teacher training institutes through a different sort of design by planning in sprints. And so if you're not familiar with a sprint, basically all a sprint is a protocol where you have a very clearly defined question and a very clearly defined product and a specific timeline so that you deliver on the answers and the products within that timeline. And for us, typically, we had 1 to 2 days to both make some big decisions and also deliver products, basically on a day or 2 days notice. And so given our time frame, we had to be able to make these decisions and ship products quickly and concurrently, all at once. And in order to be able to make several decisions all at once, we really need to focus on the first 2 sprints to set the foundation. Those 2 sprints each had the luxury of having 7 days to plan. And sprint number 1 that set the stage was really defining what readiness looks like in a very unpredictable environment. So what does readiness look like if you are going to teach potentially virtually, potentially in person, and or potentially a hybrid? And so what does readiness look like in that world? What are the sort of the knowledge, skills, and mindsets that you need? And what would teachers need to be successful and deliver for students? And then sort of the next set of sprints was, what are the outcomes and domains of learning that will lead to that readiness bar? And so once we had sort of, planned that vision, gotten clarity about the outcomes and the products, then we could set the stage for an additional set of approximately 20 to 25 sprints that we had through the rest of the summer. And Shakia actually initially joined the virtual summer teacher training team as the lead of one of our sprints. And so I'd love for her to give some additional color and really take us through where we eventually landed and what we're thinking about for the future of 2021. So Shakia.
Thanks, Sam. So yeah, I'm going to take you all back in time as we were preparing for our sprint. And so as Sam shared, a sprint tries to answer a very clear question over a distinct time frame with a clear product. And so the question that we were trying to answer is, how do we design a virtual training experience that builds community and culture and also continuously roots our incoming teachers in the mission that we were after? And we have asked ourselves that question each year as we improve on the design of our summer training. But this was different because this was the first time we were asking ourselves this question for a virtual training program where our entire teaching corps would be trained together and that our teachers and staff would be weathering a pandemic. So community and culture looks a lot different when you are actually not in the same space with one another and also weathering a pandemic and everything that was happening in our country this past summer. So how did we do it? As the lead of the sprint, I spent about a day, the days were moving very fast, gathering just critical research, articles, and perspectives that could give good fodder for the group once we came together to build a recommendation. So things like reading articles on the power of moments by Chip and Dan Heath to understand how do you create these really incredible moments of culture and community. And so I assembled a group of staff members, full-time Teach for America staff members, and they worked across different teams, worked in different communities across the country, had different roles. But what they shared was they each had a unique knack for building really resilient communities that had really strong inclusive cultures and creating really unforgettable moments. And so this group of culture leaders and experts came together and created a set of recommendations of activities, strategies, and gifts that we could execute each week of the summer training process. We then shared these recommendations with a diverse group of 2020 incoming Teach for America teachers, because most of us were quite a few years removed from being an incoming teacher, and we wanted to know, do these activities resonate? Would this gift mean anything to you? Because we really wanted to be user-centered, and we got really great feedback from our teachers that helped shape some of the strategies that we went forth with. So these recommendations range from anything like having our teachers have small group community meetings at the end of each week, and they opened up a secret envelope that had the name of the week on it. And inside that envelope was a sticker that represented all the work that they had done that past week and rooted them in our core values and our mission. And so at that meeting, they all got to show their stickers and have like an unveiling unboxing. It also included doing a virtual kickoff ceremony where we were able to hear from students and Jesse Williams, for any Grey's Anatomy fans, about his perspective, as you saw in the video, on what our teachers were going to be going after in this year of so much change. And the thing about this, the outcome of this sprint really focused in on how do we build community and culture and root our folks back into the mission. It actually informed the sprints that came after it. And because we weren't working in a linear fashion, it modified the outcomes of the sprints that came before it. And so I want to take you all into what did we actually end up with as our final design of our virtual summer teacher training program. And feel free to add any thoughts, reactions, questions into the chat, and we'll be looking at those as we go on. So at the conclusion of those 20 to 25 sprints, and I might say, I think my sprint lasted all of 3 days. So these were very quick sprints. So at the conclusion of all the sprints, we landed on our final design for the virtual summer teacher training program. And when we did that, two things became clear. The first is that we would need to innovate on nearly everything from our staffing to how we engage with students. And the second thing that became clear is that we would need to create learning spaces that felt small and supportive and responsive and intimate while we were actually physically distant for the first time. And so to get to those ends, we created a set of design principles because we had to make an enormous amount of complex decisions in a finite amount of time in a context that, as you all can remember at that time, was constantly shifting and so uncertain. We didn't know how long the pandemic was going to last, how it would impact us. And so we know we needed to have a set of design principles that helped ground us to make some really quick, important decisions. And so the design principles were, one, we valued simplicity. We were in a complex time, so we wanted to make decisions that allowed us to keep our work simple. We also valued quality over quantity. Because we knew we had a finite amount of time, 10 weeks, to get this off the ground. And so we wanted to ensure that we invested our time in were the most high quality decisions and inputs, as opposed to the most inputs. Then we wanted to be outcomes and research based, because although we were in a new moment, the entire country was in a new moment, we knew that for some of the things that we were doing, their research existed. We had folks who we had relationships with who do this work more frequently with virtual learning we could lean on. So we wanted to be as outcomes and research-based as possible. And then finally, we wanted to be user-centered. So like the example I gave of, would you all want to hear from Jesse Williams? And just asking our incoming teachers what they would most want helped us design a program that was responsive. And for our incoming teachers that were college seniors, they were already engaging in virtual learning for the most part. And so for the short stint of time that they were engaging in virtual learning in college, they had gained some real clarity, opinions, perspectives on what good virtual learning looks like for them, what they wanted to see for the summer. And so we leaned really heavily on their experience and their perspectives to shape the program. And so what that led to was us clarifying what our readiness bar was going to be and what we're going to focus on in terms of core member and teacher learning. And so we knew, like Sam said, that our teachers would be teaching in a variety of contexts. Some would be in person, some would be virtual, some would be doing both in a hybrid scenario, and they'd be doing that across a variety of communities. And so what we knew is that we needed our teachers to be equipped to lead rigorous, supportive, and inclusive classrooms. And so that became the bar that we set out to achieve this summer with core member readiness. And then we knew that in order to get there in all these different contexts, we had to get crystal clear about the domains of learning, of what our core members would actually focus on to build classrooms that are rigorous, supportive, and inclusive. And so we landed on 4 domains of learning. The first is instruction. What does strong instruction look like within your content, whether you are in an in-person space, a virtual space, or a blended space? What is your learning environment? How are you creating a classroom culture and environment that ensures that students feel included and also their leadership is nourished? Our diversity, equity, and inclusion learning, and then our reflection skill. And so the way this would look on a normal day for a teacher is they would engage in what is called like a learning cycle. So if they were an elementary teacher, they would engage in learning cycle where they would learn how to plan and execute strong read alouds for their students. They would then write a lesson plan that included strategies to maintain a supportive learning environment. They would practice that lesson to their peers and reflect with their peers on what they learned. And then they would explore how their identity impacts the way that they execute that lesson and how they build an inclusive classroom environment. So working really hard to show core members and to embed their learning in such a way where these learning domains were happening concurrently, building a set of just really clear, discrete skills that we believe would be foundational for them being prepared for the fall. And then the other thing that was true for our residential model that Sam spoke about is that our teachers would learn a skill like read alouds in a session, and then they would apply what they learned in those sessions through live student teaching. We knew that live in-person student teaching was not going to be a path forward this summer. And so we had to get innovative around how we supported our teachers to still center their work in students and families in the absence of in-person teaching. And so we partnered with a virtual small group reading company, Springboard, and our teachers taught a virtual small group reading instruction class for a group of 1 to 3 students. They did that twice a week. And then we also were able to include parent conferences at the end of each week where our teachers were able to share with families and with parents, here's all the progress that your student has made in our reading instruction time. Here is how we did it so that you can do those same activities with your child when they're not in class. And at the end of the summer, being able to celebrate with that family and share how proud you are of that student. And so it allowed for, one, students during a summer and a time where we were unsure about what education our students were going to be able to receive during a pandemic and virtual times. So we were able to ensure that this group of students received some skills to improve their foundational reading skills and also ensure that our teachers were able to root in the experience of students and families. And then we had to innovate on how we staffed this summer experience. And so to launch a change at this scale in 10 weeks, we knew we'd need to rely on our most experienced talent. And we knew we'd need like our most seasoned folks in order to pull this off. And in our residential model, we would rely on local educators who had taught through Teach for America and our alumni who would step away from their roles as teachers and as principals, operations directors, and work for the summer to train our teachers. This summer, our staff was made up of almost a third of our current full-time staff. So folks like Sam and I, who have full-time roles, that we put those down for a second and then picked up the summer training work. And then we relied on our most seasoned returning staff members. So we had some staff members who this was their 15th summer training Teach for America teachers. And so this allowed for us to have a staff that could be agile and could get started with about 1 to 2 weeks of onboarding and training, and be successful compared to our usual 3-month training runway. And then we wanted to create small, close spaces in distance learning. And so this summer, all learning happened in learning communities. And these communities consisted of about 40 to 60 new teachers and about 5 to 7 staff members. And they were with that group of people all day, every day, for the experience. And then the learning would break down even further into groups of 4 and 5, where teachers would engage in reflection, lesson planning practice, relationship building, and discussions about what they were learning across all of the domains, including diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that is what we decided on. The question now becomes, what happened? What were the outcomes? What did we learn? And so going into the summer, we had 2 really big wonderings in embarking on a huge unknown. The first was, will our teachers feel as connected to each other and to the organization as they have in the past with our residential model? And the second is, will our teachers feel as prepared as they have in the past to become a successful teacher, given the uncertainty of what was going to be true for them in the fall and us having a virtual program? And so we had a couple of major discoveries coming from those big wonderings. The first is that we discovered that having one national virtual teaching program allowed us to create a much more consistent experience across our incoming teacher corps, as opposed to when we had about 20 summer training programs that were in execution. And it reduced the variability in experience for our teachers. The second thing we discovered is that, and it's in the quote on the slide, is that we were actually able to have our teachers' feelings of connectedness and community with us were actually on par, and in some cases slightly above our results for the past 3 years on our teacher satisfaction survey. And then our teachers also believed that the preparation they received over the summer was just as, and in some cases, even more valuable in their efforts to become a successful teacher over the past 3 years. And so those were some very large discoveries that we had about doing this virtual program and the wins we were able to get from it. And so I want to toss it to Sam for a bit, because Sam, in her role as executive director in Miami, works directly with incoming teachers and can share more about how these outcomes are actually playing out now that our first year teachers are closing out their first semester.
Great. Thanks, Shakia. I'm going to be very quick, but we'll just share the following. When we ended the 5 weeks of summer training, we knew our onboarding would need to continue, as it always does. Our pre-service continues. And we had strong early indicators from our summer training that our core members had mastered a set of foundational skills. However, as an executive director who is responsible for ensuring that we have strong teachers in front of kids on day one and deliver to students immediately, who's on the ground with principals and school and district administrators, a big question on my mind was, will our core members be prepared no matter what the range of teaching modality is? We were unclear about what the modality for teaching would be, right up to the start of the beginning of the school year. And so what I would name is, right now, to kind of set the stage, the majority, nearly 85% of my teachers are teaching students live at this point. About 70% of them are teaching dual modality. So, teaching both students live in person as well as online. And I've got, the rest, a small group who are fully virtual, but also in schools. And we're seeing strong results just across the board. We're hearing directly from principals, we're observing, we're seeing in student results, but this group of teachers is doing as well as any group of teachers. And I'd say that clarifying what readiness meant, clarifying the sorts of reflective mindsets we needed on adaptability, and really also developing our teachers' ability to use technology and to see what strong, teaching practices in a virtual environment as we consider culture, as we consider outcomes. It set up our teachers to be doing well. Is it a different year? It is. But by and large, and not just in Miami, we've been in communication with executive directors and folks across the country. We're hearing the same things. Our teachers are as prepared. They're seen as flexible. They're able to engage in meaningful ways. And so, obviously the proof is in the pudding as we continue to monitor student learning. But we're seeing really positive strides as we start this fall. So thanks for letting me share that, Shakia.
Thanks, Sam. And so the question that we are asking ourselves, a really big, gnarly question that we're asking ourselves is, the pandemic has caused a permanent shift in schooling. And so we're wondering, how do we remain relevant, agile, and responsive in teacher preparation and preparing a cohort of teachers that can quickly adapt and be prepared for an ever-changing school landscape? And so to add some fodder to you all in asking that question, I want to share a video with you all that shares this perspective from two 2020 teachers and one school leader who works with our incoming teaching corps from our Eastern North Carolina region. And they're going to talk about what they believe they needed to know before heading into the classroom and how their perspective has changed since the pandemic and after teaching and leading during this time.
Learning is so fun, right? And the world is so incredible, and there's so much that we can try to understand and figure out and make sense of, and there's just so many opportunities to experience the world with awe and wonder. And so I just think teachers and educators got to bring that to the classroom and to the school building, because kids deserve to experience that. And honestly, we should be learning that from kids. They already have that, and then we uneducate them out of it. So I think it's our job to be super mindful of that and to continue to cultivate it and grow it. I just think when people live a life of curiosity, they're going to end up living a much better life, and one of joy and awe and wonder. And I think all humans deserve that. So that's got to be number one. When I think about the skill sets and the abilities and mindsets and knowledge that educators need when coming to the classroom, 5 things sort of stick out to me. It's curiosity, self-awareness, a sense of agency, the ability to build relationships with people, and a designer's mindset.
So for me, what I felt like was needed before starting in a classroom was a reminder that I'm committed to the work and committed to my students to provide them with the best education I could possibly give them. The second thing that I needed was organization. So I needed to be organized so that my students could know that I'm a teacher that is coming in here. Yes, I'm new, but I'm coming in here organized and ready to help them learn the standards that they need to learn, but also the knowledge that they need so that they can be better advocates for themselves, and so that they can have a high quality education experience and to move on to the next level feeling prepared and excited to learn. And lastly, the third skill that I felt like I needed was flexibility. And so flexibility is key when it comes to education, because especially in this pandemic time, that we need to be flexible in this moment, because our students, they're all navigating this together. We're all navigating this thing together. So we're all starting out fresh and new. And so being flexible is important because I'm able to adapt my lesson plans, adapt my expectations for my students, to still have high expectations for them, but still be able to be flexible and say, okay, I understand this happened at home. I understand that what's going on. And so I'm going to be a little bit more flexible with the way that you have to turn assignments and different things. So I had to make sure that I'm a flexible teacher.
Since entering the classroom, I really had to adapt the curriculum to the needs of my students and also the time we're living in now. I've had to find creative and engaging ways to motivate my students for online learning. And I've had to take care of myself to be able to work these long hours and do this work on the long term.
And so I think what I want to see from educators moving forward, and I think 2020 has shown us we need this more now than ever, is this idea of practicing resilience. So taking care of ourselves, taking care of our bodies, getting 8 hours of sleep, exercising, eating well, making healthy choices. I just can't emphasize enough how important that is, because when we do those things, we get to show up as our best selves. And in the tougher moments, it's much easier to notice what's happening inside of us and to respond in a way that we want to respond instead of react in a way that we're later going to regret. So I just think 2020 has really shown us that every human needs that right now, but I think especially educators. We talk about self-care a lot, and self-care is super important, But superficial self-care is one thing. Really fully committing to one's health and well-being in order to take care of others is another. And that's what we need to see more from educators and more in schools, frankly.
Before becoming a classroom educator, I thought I would need to know the curriculum backwards and forwards before I can enter the classroom. 3 words to describe virtual summer teacher training are demanding, accountable, and essential.
So for me, what words describe it is exhilarating, commitment, and challenging. So I chose exhilarating because it was an exhilarating experience. It was a very quick pace, fast experience, but it was amazing because it gave me the resources and the things that I needed to study so that I could be a strong teacher and I could also be a strong advocate for my students. I chose challenging because it was a challenging time. It was not easy, but it was well worth the time and the effort. And lastly, I chose commitment because I'm committed to the work that is focusing on my students and providing them with the most high quality education I can possibly give them.
The 3 words that I would use to describe this moment are challenge, hope, and awareness. I say challenge because this has been tough. I mean, just not knowing what to do all the time is really challenging and scary. And this fear of, well, what if we get it wrong? What if we miss a kid? What if a kid falls through the gaps? What if a teacher gets so burnt out that they can't keep doing the phenomenal work they've been doing? What if there's a parent who gets COVID? Just these what ifs and the fears there make this such a challenging moment in leading, at least for me. I guess I can speak for myself. For me, and the other challenge is just I can feel the weight of the anxiety and the fears of everybody around me, especially in my staff, and I don't want them to feel that, and I don't want our kids to feel that. And I imagine teachers feel this about children too, and I want to fix it, right? Like every part of my soul wants to fix it for them, and I can't. And learning to accept that has been really, really difficult, but important. On the flip side of that, though, hope. I'm feeling a ton of hope in this moment. I am seeing educators and my colleagues and my friends do just mind-blowing things. From watching a teacher create a safe space for kids in a breakout room to process the election, to talking about what would it look like, if we were to have virtual school for a longer time. I mean, what does that look like? And how do we learn from that? To piloting new things. We're piloting pods at my school right now, and it's been really interesting. And I have I'm fortunate enough to have folks around me who are pushing me and our school leaders and our teachers to think about not just how do we learn from these right now, but how do we learn from these in the future? And that's hard to pivot there sometimes and go there, especially when everything feels so urgent right now. But it's so important and critical we think about what are we learning from this that will help us transform how we do school. We got to do that. And the fact that so many folks are talking about that right now, and so many folks are saying we can't go back to the way we were, that gives me just all the hope in the world.
Teaching is a pretty difficult career, but I feel like I'm constantly being reminded by being a part of Teach for America that what we do in our individual classrooms is incredibly relevant and urgent to creating systematic change. And so I feel like I ask myself this question often: why Teach for America? Why I work these long hours? Why do this hard work? But it's because I believe in the mission. And I appreciate the transparency of Teach for America as an organization. And when I enter TFA spaces, I know I'll be surrounded and supported by community advocates and organizers turned classroom educators. And this is a great source of hope that one day we'll achieve educational equity, because every student, every day today, has a right to an excellent education.
Really important to me to be a teacher that promotes advocacy and also promotes excellent education. And so it's been amazing working with Teach for America thus far, and I'm excited for the years to come within this organization.
I know we can figure it out. We just got to commit to learning right now, doing as much empathy work as we can right now, gathering as much insights about kids and their learning and their development and what parents want to be true, and then trying new things. And so I'm hoping that more and more schools will take that charge. We'll try new things, and as we do this, we learn together, and we could build a new system and just like a better future for everybody.
And so now we want to open the floor for any questions, thoughts, comments that are coming up about what we shared, and also about our big gnarly question of how do we remain relevant, agile, and responsive in teacher preparation when the school landscape is ever changing? So feel free to pop your questions in the chat or come off mute. Oh, yes, I got a question in the chat. Can you share how you balanced wanting to cover so much with Zoom fatigue and being online all day? And so I'll kick it off and then pass it to Sam. We were extremely mindful of it, and we're still surprised at just how fatiguing it could be to be on Zoom all day. So we scheduled the days where core members were in live engagements for about 5 hours a day. And then they had asynchronous training that happened in the mornings or in the afternoons that happened on an individual basis. And so we tried to split that up with making the groups really small. And so they weren't in whole group spaces very frequently. The biggest groups they were in were about 40 to 50, and those were short stints of time, but they spent most of their time in small groups of 4 or 5. And then partway through the summer, those groups of 4 or 5 would just exchange numbers. And during discussion moments, they just call each other on like a 5-way and go for a walk as they were engaging in that discussion. So our teachers and our staff members found some ways to bring some light, some outside walking into the space. Sam, anything different? You're on mute.
Oh, I'm on mute. I'm off mute now, I think. I would just share that was a key question. I'd say there's 2 things that influenced the time, 3 things that influenced timing. One was we actually had to run sort of 2 separate time flows. We ran one time zone that ran East Coast time and one that ran West Coast time, because we also had folks in Hawaii, folks in the middle of the country, et cetera, and folks could, our teachers, no matter where they work, could actually opt into one of those time flows. And while there was 5 hours a day that were, that was meant to be in person or synchronous over Zoom or some other way, we actually did 2 things to check ourselves. So one was we conducted a couple of very intense focus groups with a representative sampling of teachers, and we asked them directly, now that you are no longer going to be in a university site or a residential setting, now that there's a pandemic, what are your expectations for how many hours a day you can actually stand engaging, right? Like, what are your expectations here? And then also ask them specifically, given the different virtual learning environments you have been in, what is the percentage? And we asked very specifically, what percentage of time do you feel like you need synchronously, so over Zoom or face-to-face somehow, versus asynchronously on your own, learning in modules or learning something else. Very interestingly, that consistently came out to being somewhere between 70 to 30%, so 70% synchronous, 30% asynchronous, or 60-40. It was very, very close. And that actually also was connected to the research that we found from university sites. So when we were connecting with other folks who were, sort of experts in virtual spaces, they had a similar sort of percentage breakdown. And so even though I would just name that one thing we were unable to do is actually test out some of our synchronous or asynchronous work for how long it would take. So for example, if we assigned a reading, we weren't able prior to execution to figure out how long that reading would actually take. And so our days got longer in some cases that we really probably would have planned for. So it's a delicate balance, and I do think it's top of mind. I know Shaki is thinking about it. It's really top of mind as we enter into 2021, where we're going to continue being virtual for a large portion of our onboarding.
Thanks, Sam. And with that, I know we are at time, and so we will close out with a huge thank you to you all for engaging with us today. And I will name, as Sam shared, we were having to get really innovative this past summer because we were in the midst of a pandemic. And what is also true right now is that we are still in the midst of a pandemic. And so as we think about this upcoming summer, we are taking the lessons that we learned from this summer and not leaving behind that spirit of innovation and reimagining, because it is what's needed not only for our summer training program, but likely for education as a whole. So thank you all.